Lesson 49, Section 1. In this presentation, at long last, we will be looking at the rules of contraction. We'll be taking a look at contracted verbs in epsilon, at the present tense, active voice of these contracted verbs, and at how these contracted verbs behave in the other tenses. If you recall, in Attic Greek, it is common for contraction to occur under certain circumstances. Non-Attic form, we might see this in Herodotus, for instance, or Homer even. Poi ein. We have the verb stem, poi e, and we have, in this case, our infinitive ending. In Attic, in order to avoid the difficulty of saying these two sounds back to back, this is called hiatus, we contract these two sounds to one sound, a diphthong poi ein. And the sound changes, we lose the letter, but we also see a change in the accent. Now, with verbs, this tends to happen when the stem ends in one of the following short vowels. It's not just any sort of hiatus, but when the stem ends in an alpha, epsilon, or omicron, we tend to see contraction in Attic Greek. And of these three vowels, by far, the most common is the epsilon. So poi e a is obviously an extremely important verb. I make, I do. And many other important verbs also have stems that end in epsilon, and so get contracted in Attic Greek. These are the tenses we have been introduced to so far. The nice thing about contraction is that we only have to worry about it, really, the rules of contraction in these two tenses, the imperfect and the present. We're going to look today just at the present. The basic rules of contraction for verbs with stems in epsilon, again there are two other kinds of verbs where we see contraction occur, are as follows. Here we have the stem, the ending, and the contracted ending. We've got the original stem, the original ending, and then what results when those two combine. Epsilon plus epsilon is the diphthong a. Epsilon plus omicron is the diphthong u, and epsilon plus anything else really is equal to anything else really. And these are the basic rules. There are exceptions, but if we have these down, we actually get pretty far. So let's look at the present active of pilea, I love. These are the forms we would expect. Pilea, pilees, pilee. It's kind of hard to say. So let's look at the first rule of contraction. Epsilon plus epsilon equals the diphthong a. We've got it in four places, it looks like, including the second person singular imperative there, love or be loving, something like that. So we see contraction occur there. So it's pile rather than pilee or something like that. Pileite, y'all love, rather than pileete. Now, the second rule of contraction, epsilon plus omicron equals the diphthong u, we see in three places. And they're in the first person plural, pileamen, we love. We're going to contract that to pilumen. Note, of course, that we have the change in the accent. There are rules for this. We don't have to worry about it too much, but we get a circumflex there where there was none. The contraction does not obey the normal rules of accentuation. It has its own set of rules, which you can look in the grammar and other places for details of. And our final rule, probably the most common here, epsilon plus anything else really equals anything else. So pilea, first person singular there, I love, it ends up just as being the omega there, the second element of the two things that are being contracted. Pilees, we get the second element, just the diphthong a. And that's true for all of these other places. And this is the result. There's one place where there is an exception in the optative singular. Instead of piloime, for instance, which we'd expect that the epsilon plus the diphthong oi would leave us with oi. We actually get really a a unique set of endings here, and it's ploiein, ploies, ploie. So this is really the one thing that doesn't adhere to normal rules. But these are the forms, the contracted forms of a contracted verb in epsilon in the present tense active voice. Again, we'll take a look at the rules of contraction in the imperfect soon, but really it's just the present tense and the imperfect that we have to worry about this in. The other voices we do have to worry about it in, but we'll get to that later. Other tenses, that is not the perfect and the imperfect. In all other tenses apart from the imperfect, contracted verbs are very regular, actually. It's very easy to form them. Instead of contracting, the vowel at the end of the stem, we've been looking at epsilon, simply lengthens. So we would expect the future tense of pilea, if formed normally, to be pilesa. We would just add a sigma to get our future tense stem and add our basically present tense endings. Now what happens instead with these verbs, in Attic, again, in Herodotus' dialect Ionic, or Homer's dialect, we might see something different, but it's pilesa, that epsilon lengthens to eta. In the aorist, we'd expect epilesa, but we get epilesa, that epsilon lengthens to eta. In the perfect, instead of pepileka, we get pepileka. Again, very regular, actually, in all of these other tenses. For the forms that we just looked at, you can take a look at page 76. And for further reading on contracted verbs, I would encourage you to take a look at this. See page 73. Thank you very much.